There is treasure and glory to be found in the worlds of fantasy. Magical places on mountaintops, deep dark dungeons, and forests that are home to whimsical creatures are such places where these things can be found. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the rules to traverse the lands and dungeons of D&D, as well as other info necessary to survive while you're exploring the wilds. This is the next pillar of adventure, exploration. Now that we know how to fight and protect ourselves from hostile forces, let's send our characters out into the world. You can't find treasure and slay monsters if you stay at home, after all. Wherever it is that your party ends up, you had to journey to get there. DMs can quickly summarize travel time, cutting out minutes, hours, or even days. But sometimes the time it takes to travel is given more importance. Like, a neighboring city is about to come under attack, and the player characters need to warn them in time. There are two factors that go into determining travel time: the party's travel pace, and the terrain they're traveling through. A group of adventurers can decide the pace at which their group will travel, either a normal, slow, or fast pace. There is a table in the player's handbook on page 182, or in the basic rules on page 67, that shows how quickly a party can travel in minutes, hours, and days at each pace. The table assumes the characters are traveling along roads and well-maintained paths. If characters are traversing through areas of difficult terrain, such as root-filled jungles or steep gravel-covered mountain paths, the distance that can be traveled is halved. This is also true for movement in combat. If we talk in terms of grid maps, a character with 30 feet of movement could move 6 squares. If they're moving through difficult terrain, they can only move 3. The benefits of a faster pace are pretty clear, as you're able to travel further in less time. The detriment is that the group is less perceptive to the environment around them, resulting in a -5 penalty to everyone's passive perceptions. A slow pace allows a party to utilize stealth. They can also investigate and look around an area more carefully while they're on the move, but of course they cover less ground. The rules assume that when characters spend a day traveling, they travel for 8 hours. If the party decides they want to push themselves to continue traveling past the 8 hours, this is called a forced march. Doing a forced march can make characters become exhausted. At the end of every hour of a forced march, each character will need to make a Constitution saving throw. The DC to beat is 10 plus 1 for each hour past the initial 8 hours of travel. So, the DC at the end of the first hour is 11, the second hour would be a DC of 12, etc. Regardless of success or fail, the party will successfully cover the distance. But, for any character that fails the Constitution save, they receive 1 level of exhaustion. There are 6 different levels of exhaustion, and each with a different penalty. The 6th level of exhaustion results in character death. You don't have to stop your forced march if you fail that Constitution saving throw, but you do risk getting more levels of exhaustion more easily. You can also ride different mounts, which offer faster travel speeds for short periods of time. For an hour, a mount can travel at a gallop, which is twice the distance of the fast pace at 8 miles. The rules are vague as to how frequently you can ride at a gallop, only saying that you could keep at that pace if you had a fresh mount every 8 or so miles. Some rules in D&D are left vague so as to leave it up to the DM's discretion, so your DM would need to make a ruling on how often you can gallop. There are also vehicles characters can ride in, such as carriages and wagons. Vehicles also choose their pace from the travel pace table. Water vehicles, like ships, are limited to whatever the speed of the vehicle is. They cannot choose to go at a slow or fast pace. Though, with a big enough crew, a ship can travel for 24 hours a day. Special mounts and vehicles also exist that offer faster speeds, as well as flight, such as griffins, pegasi, magic carpets, and maybe even possibly airships. When traversing the world, there are often times when you will need to do more than just walk. There might be times when you have to jump small gorges, climb rocky walls, or swim across rivers. Climbing and swimming have your speed, unless your character has a climb speed or swim speed, as many monsters do. Sometimes climbing or swimming can be made more difficult because of a lack of handholds or choppy waters, and a DM may call for a strength athletics check. So that was swimming and climbing, but what about jumping? Jumping is associated with one's strength score. If you give yourself a 10-foot running start, you can make a long jump up to a number of feet equal to your strength score. And I don't mean your modifier, I mean your full strength score. That can be up to 20 feet. A standing long jump, without the 10-foot start, can take you up to half of that distance. But this assumes that your jump height doesn't matter. If you also need a little bit of height in your jump, your DM may call for a DC 10 strength athletics check. The object you're leaping over can be no taller than 1/4 the distance you're jumping. If you fail the check, you hit the obstacle. If you land in difficult terrain, make a DC 10 dexterity acrobatics check to see if you land on your feet. Failure to do so will result in landing prone. If you're looking to make a high jump, you can jump 3 plus your strength modifier in feet if you have a 10-foot running start. Like the long jump, you can jump only half of that height without the running start. For each foot that you jump, whether high jump or long jump, it will use a foot of your movement speed. The DM may allow you to stretch your limits in jumping with a strength athletics check at their discretion. While out exploring the world, there are certain things an adventuring party should consider. Who's in the front and who's in the back? Is speed or stealth a priority? What happens if you come across others while exploring? We'll take a look at each of these questions. As a party travels through the wilderness or a dungeon, it is important to know how the party has arranged themselves while they travel. This is referred to as a marching order. Think of it in terms of characters walking in a line. There will be at least someone in the front, someone in the back, and usually more people in the middle. The player's handbook calls these positions ranks. Depending on where you are, you can help the party with certain tasks as you're traveling. The front rank is most likely to encounter any traps and engage in combat first. The back rank is most likely to notice anyone tailing the party and be the first line of defense from the rear. The middle ranks are protected by the front and back ranks, and there are other tasks that might get delegated to them. You're not limited to having one person in the front or back ranks, as long as there is enough room for them to travel side by side. If there suddenly isn't enough room to have multiple people in the front and back, then the marching order must change, forcing party members to become a middle rank position. It's also possible to just have a front and back rank as your marching order, or just a front rank. So we've already discussed how a party focusing on speed would travel, but what about the party that is trying to be unnoticed? In order for a party to travel stealthily, they must be going at a slow pace. And they can't be out in the open. You need to be obscured in order to hide. If the characters were traveling stealthily, and they happen to come across other creatures, there is an opportunity that they can sneak by them and avoid a possible encounter. Alternatively, you could prepare for an ambush and surprise your opponents. But if you come across another group of people and you weren't traveling stealthily, both groups must then decide how they interact. Sometimes an encountered group doesn't intend to fight. Your adventuring party could decide that they want to talk, or run away, or wait and see what the other group does. The other group makes their decision on their approach. Otherwise, the players can also revert back to initiating combat. Just as stealth is a tool for the players, the other denizens of the fantasy world will also use stealth. Danger could lurk just out of sight. Fierce bandits, hungry monsters, or who knows what else. The DM will use the players' passive perception scores to see if they notice any hidden threats while they travel. Your passive perception can be found just below your ability scores on your character sheet, and reflects your awareness without actively being a lookout. The DM may declare that only characters in a certain rank may notice hidden threats. If there is a trap ahead, the DM might only take into account the passive perception of the front rank characters. If a creature is following the party, only the back rank characters have a chance to notice them. If the party is traveling at a fast pace, they will take a -5 penalty to their passive perception scores, opting for speed instead of environmental awareness. Earlier I mentioned that characters in the middle rank may have other tasks delegated to them, but the tasks I'm about to list can really be done by anyone regardless of what rank they are in. However, performing a different task does mean that the party member doesn't contribute their passive perception score to noticing hidden threats, which is considered an activity in itself. A character can help the party by navigating, trying to prevent them from becoming lost. Drawing a map to help track the party's progress and help them if they do become lost. A character can also attempt to track a creature, following hints of their passage such as footsteps. Or there is also the task of foraging for food and water. Many of these tasks require a wisdom survival check, with the exception of drawing a map. That task doesn't require any check. If there are other tasks you think could be useful, you can ask your DM's permission to do that task instead. Not many individuals are equipped or skilled enough to survive in the dangerous locales of a fantasy world. Climbing sheer cliffs and diving into the darkest of caves are acts for individuals who either have confidence in their abilities or a lack of care for their safety. Though the creatures of these locations can be a threat, so too can the environment itself. There are natural hazards such as falling and suffocation. When you fall, you take 1d6 bludgeoning damage per 10 feet fallen, to a maximum of 20d6. In terms of worrying about suffocation, a person can hold their breath for a number of minutes equal to 1 plus their Constitution modifier, minimum of 30 seconds. If a creature runs out of breath, it can survive for a number of rounds equal to its Constitution modifier, minimum of 1. After this point, it drops to 0 hit points and begins rolling death saving throws. A lack of visibility and light can also present problems. There are 2 stages of vision obscurity: lightly obscured and heavily obscured. An area that is lightly obscured is difficult to see through, such as a frosted window, and will give disadvantage on wisdom perception checks that rely on sight. An area that is heavily obscured blocks vision entirely. Any creature that is in a heavily obscured area is given the blinded condition, and could include heavy smoke and dense foliage. When it comes to visibility, light plays a role in that as well. The presence of light or lack thereof can create 3 different categories of illumination: bright light, dim light, and darkness. In bright light, most creatures will be able to see normally, as if out during the day. Areas of dim light are considered a lightly obscured area, and are often found as the boundary between a source of light, like a torch, and the surrounding darkness. Darkness is considered a heavily obscured area. Darkness occurs outdoors at night, within an unlit dungeon, and also within areas of magical darkness. A lot of creatures, including playable races, have dark vision. Creatures with dark vision can treat areas of darkness within a certain radius as dim light instead. So instead of creatures being blinded outright, they will instead make wisdom perception checks with disadvantage. However, creatures with dark vision can't see color in darkness, only shades of gray. Some creatures will have other types of vision, like blind sight and true sight. This is more relevant for monsters, but some spells can grant such abilities to players. The information for these types of sight can be found on page 183 to 185 of the player's handbook, or pages 68 to 69 of the basic rules. Regardless of what environment you might find yourself in, all creatures living within those environments subsist on food and water, and adventurers are no exception. Rations tend to be a player's best friend. They're a cheap food source, such as a nut mix, meat jerky, or a small piece of bread. Characters need 1 pound of food per day, but can last a number of days without food equal to 3 plus their Constitution modifier, minimum of 1. At the end of each day beyond that, a character automatically suffers 1 level of exhaustion. A character must eat their required 1 pound of food to reset their number of days without eating to 0. If a character wishes to, they can eat half rations instead. This will count as half a day without food. A character needs 1 gallon of water per day, or double of that in hot environments. If a character only drinks half of that, they must succeed on a DC 15 Constitution save, or suffer a level of exhaustion at the end of the day. If a character has even less water, they automatically suffer the exhaustion at the end of the day. If your character already has 1 or more levels of exhaustion, your character will take 2 levels of exhaustion when exhausted from a lack of food or water. As you explore, you will come to realize that most actions you can take have a cause and effect. If you chop at a tree, eventually it will fall, perhaps for the purpose of making a bridge over a river. Players can interact with objects that are in the environment as per the usual rules of the game. The player describes what it is they want to do. If a roll is required, the DM will tell them what kind of roll to make, then the DM will describe what happens. Characters can also damage objects with weapons or spells. Objects are immune to poison and psychic damage, but can be affected by other weapon and spell attacks just as creatures would be. DMs will determine the stats of objects, like AC and hit points, and possible resistances and immunities. An object will always fail strength and dexterity saving throws, and are immune to effects that require any other saves. When an object reaches 0 hit points, it breaks. A character might instead choose to make a strength check to break an object. The DM sets the DC for this check. There were a lot of specific rules in this episode on exploration. Some DMs may alter some rules, or even forego some of them. While one DM might decide that horses can gallop for 8 hours a day, another DM might have the distance a character can long jump just because they think it seems too far. The point being, these rules are here for those who want them. Nothing is concrete in D&D, and will vary based on the rules that your group wants to use. But with these rules as a basis, you will be more informed on how to survive as an explorer in a fantasy world. In the next episode, we'll be talking about the third and final pillar of D&D, social interaction. Until next time, be kind and play dicely.